So we're here to talk through this Dutch loop by Bryce Herdt called Diamond. It's got an anti-symmetric pattern for this middle shape. Every white and every black are an opposite and not touching spaces. Gray's filling out the rest, so it's a pretty clean visual shape. But we're going to see it's probably a pretty tough logical shape to get through. Star of the puzzle, at least for me, few spaces to look, but grays near these corners, they have to have a 120-degree turn through them, and so they'll always have to have one cell that's between the cells they turn through. And so there's only one option for that. Whites you always go straight through, and blacks have to immediately turn, and so where one of those immediate turns would go outside the edge of the grid, this turns in. That now means this gray circle has just one option that leaves a 120-degree turn for it. The whites on this edge have to go immediately straight. The white up here has to go immediately straight, immediate turn because we can't come out of the grid. This gray circle has just one space to get a 120-degree turn. In the lower right side, I've got two options for this black clue, this 60-degree or that 60-degree, but they always use this one end, so I'll mark that in. And something I'm just visually noting, I don't know if it'll be too useful, or these grays on edges are still somewhat constrained. They have basically always two options, like one that goes immediately left or one that skips one cell and comes in. But notice you're always going to take one of these first two cells that it sees and one of the second set of two cells that it sees, and the rest of them are excluded because they're outside the edge of the grid. And when two grays are together, they're actually going to immediately touch. Like if this pattern came in, you'd form this kind of shape, the C immediately off that edge. But if they don't immediately touch, they touch one cell into the grid and form this shape. So however one of these grays goes, it instantly forces the other gray near it, and so we're going to think about that. It looks like a cell like this cell, which is hit by one of those patterns and not the other one, could be key. But right now this lower right of the grid seems fairly open. The most constrained part seems near the top, and so I'm going to look at this gray circle, which has to use one of these two cells and one of these two cells, and recognize by marking that into the grid that one thing you can say is that the white can't come through this way. What that does is eliminate both of these cells for this gray clue. It would make the gray have to take a 60-degree turn. So here we know there's a fourth set of edges. And another thing I'm seeing where I've got these two ends that I want to keep separate, a path that's going to come through this white circle that goes horizontal is going to bring those edges pretty quickly in. And why is that? Well, it's going to force this gray to come like this with the horizontal. So this is actually the path with the horizontal white circle in the grid. These ends are now very close, and they can't come in like this. That would close off the loop. But if they come this way, the black has to immediately turn up or immediately turn left. Again, it closes off the loop or collides. So this horizontal option is not available for it. And so we're just removing the colored cells. The first deduction through the diamond of the grid is marking this white edge from the lower left to upper right diagonal. That means this gray turns to the right. This end has to come down but not close with itself, so it comes like this. We can mark some of these ends now as unusable, like the white can't come this direction because this edge is now not usable, so we always get some of these notes. This cell over here looks somewhat interesting at this stage, and in part, again, it's going to be tied to what happens if the white cell just next to it doesn't visit it. So let's sort of think about these scenarios. If white doesn't visit it, it always takes this path, and what that shows is that actually this is an invalid direction for white. Of the three options for it, this is one we can immediately eliminate, because if it came through that route, it's forcing this channel back through the yellow cell, and gray has an invalid turn. So I think I can mark these edges off. And how that helps me now is that black now doesn't have many options for its 60-degree turn. In particular, it can't take this edge because the two edges right next to it are invalid, and so it has to take these edges. That comes down here to the close at top. White now has to be horizontal, take this turn in. This has this shape for sure. And we'll just mark these edges that are not going to be coming off this open end because it's going to be an immediate turn here off black. We'll mark this edge off that we know is an immediate turn off white. This black circle, which has three ends to it, always takes this center end and then could take one or the other of these. Marking that in and then marking the impossible ends around this gray. we now see that this black is again constrained like one of these ones up top, that it has only one option for a 60-degree turn. It can't take this direction. It's got to take these two cells, which means the gray turns over here. This gray now has just one option for its 120 degree, and this black has to immediately turn. So we get this in the grid. This gray has just one option for its 120 degree turn, and the loop ends have to extend. This gray has just one option. So we're getting some good progress through to here. It still looks like there's a fair amount of constraints. There could still be like two options. You could almost work through them, like how this gray goes. If it's like this, it looks like that actually forces this pattern in the grid. So there are different things like that. But you know, we're not trying to do a trial and error path through the bottom of the puzzle. So let's try to see if we can find another key logical space. And I think that is going to come back to what we were observing before about how these grays work together. So let's come back to this cell, which we said at the start may be important to look at, and recognize that right now it can't be taken by this top end. And there was also a path through the grays like this that we would have seen eliminates 4 ends from it because all the cells around are now connecting. And so this pattern around the grays is no longer good because this cell would get isolated. So looking at this cell in the pattern of grays, we can see visually that that's a forced elimination. This black immediately turns, this loop end has to come out, this gray turns in, which is valid for this white. This gray now only has one 120 degree option. This white now has to take this path straight. This loop end has to connect up, and we've got to fill all the remaining cells. So we finish out this grid, which had some fairly tricky deductions, a little bit of look-ahead logic throughout, seeing how the white cell directions would force particular turns around, say, gray cells or around like this tight channel or the ways through the top of the grid, and then looking at this cell in green, which was somewhat isolated unless it's touched by these grays on the outside, was the last deduction that we needed to make to get into the bottom of the grid and complete the one loop. So I hope you got something through this video watching the solve, and we'll see you again soon.